So, welcome to our viewers, and it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Jane Donald. She's the wife of Trevor, the mother of two daughters, and the daughter of the late Dr. Lionel Atlas, who was for many years in private general medical practice in Durban North, South Africa. So, Jane, welcome, and I really look forward to our discussion this afternoon.
Thank you, Garth, and thank you for contacting me to discuss or have this discussion about Dad.
Because I first met him in 1971, and that is now 50 years ago, and I was seconded to Natal Command as a military medical officer. And little did I realize the pivotal role that he would actually play in my life for me, as it resulted in me actually commencing medical practice here in Durban on the 1st of August 1972. And so almost 50 years have passed, but it's been 50 years since I met him, and I've sat in the same study as we are at the moment. And had that meeting not occurred, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be sitting here with you thinking about the wonderful impact that he's had on, certainly on my life, and I'm sure on many others as well. Do you recall when he started practice, or do you know when he did? And what were your early memories as a doctor's daughter? Because a feature in many households, and it certainly was in ours in the early days, was the regular disturbance of planned activities. The meals for which he was late, the meals where he didn't finish, the times that he was so frequently called out at the last minute, at all hours. And so how did you and the family manage those occasions?
We've racked our brains to try and actually establish the date that Dad started practice. My brother was born in 1948, and I know Dad was already in private practice at that stage. So one would imagine it would be in 1946, 47 that he started his practice. Dad was a special GP. He really was different to a lot of the GPs that were around at the time. And I think he also was ahead of his time. What comes to mind, you've brought up the mention of the impact he had on you. That was partly maybe his business continuity plan, which doctors and people in those days didn't even think about. And today, when you talk about business, you've got to have a business continuity plan. GPs in those days just worked and worked and worked without thinking ahead. And I think Dad encouraged young doctors so that they could become locums, help to him, and he could help them and they could help him in many ways. And I think that's what you found with your relationship with Dad. And you've mentioned the impact doctors had on families, or the doctor's life of a family. Yes, we're sitting in the study today. We moved back into this house in 1981 when Dad died. And this was the study. This was the heart of our house, because the telephone was here. There was a landline and one telephone downstairs and one telephone upstairs, which was a luxury in some homes. Most homes didn't have two telephones. You only had an incoming line and you had your telephone attached to it. And all our meals were taken in the study. We used to sit here and have all our evening meals here. And the dining room, which we've transposed into a family room, was where we sat and did our homework, because there was a table and we sat and did our homework in the dining room.
Very often the case.
Yeah, and yet we didn't eat at the dining room table. We ate on our lap so that Dad could answer the phone if necessary. There were no mobile phones around. I think that has made any GP's life a lot easier. You're available wherever you are, wherever you might be. Whereas in his time, you couldn't. You had to be attached to that landline. Holidays were another issue that we haven't really discussed at length, but holidays were something that I remember quite in detail. We used to have to take our holidays very close to home because Dad would drop us somewhere with Mom and my brother, and he would commute every day to work and come back in the evening to spend the evenings with us. And my earliest memories are the oyster box, and I've got pictures of me around the swimming pool as a 4-5-year-old with my brother, and I think the oyster box was Dad's favourite spot in Durban North, or Umhlanga, Durban North.
Indeed.
And we used to go there for our annual holidays. I mean, if you said to people today that you went to the oyster box for your annual holidays, they would think you were in a very, very elite league. But it was more a convenience thing. And then as we got older, I remember holidays being a cottage up the north coast. We used to go to a cottage at Salt Rock. And again, we took it for the month, and Dad used to come in every single day to work, because as a GP, if you're not working, you're not earning.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a hard life on a family, because Dad used to come backwards and forwards, and we used to see him in the evenings. The other little bit of down memory lane that you brought up was Natal Command. Dad was a major at Natal Command, and I think, if I'm correct, it was the highest rank that a non-serving person could hold in the army. And he held that title with pride. He was very proud of his association with Natal Command, and I think he used to be the doctor there as well. He used to see patients from the army. But that I'm not 100% sure of. But I know he spent a lot of time with the army, with Natal Command.
Indeed, because as I said, that's where I met him, and I can certainly recall the times you talk about the telephones, that we also had the landline. Fortunate to get one just as soon as I started, and again, and I think that was through Dad's connections and his networking that this occurred. And we would have a telephone in the hall, in our bedroom, and in the dining room. And even we arranged for the post office in those days to install an outdoor bell, so that when working in the garden, one would at least know that the phone was ringing, and you could drop tools and actually answer the phone. And obviously, it's a far cry from what we experience today. Again, if I recall some of the early days in practice, and until fairly recently, Jeanette often accompanied me on calls, because this was often the only time that we were together. And if we were invited out to friends for a function, we would go in separate cars, because I was invariably called out, and seldom did I get back to the event or the occasion. These were certainly challenging times. But getting back to your dad, he played an incredibly pivotal role in my life in the early stages of my career until he died in 1981. And I've referred to this in the book, which is due to be published, Embracing Time. So I learned a great deal from him, and his sage advice, his wisdom, his guiding hands, and just his understanding and his compassion, I think, as well, just meant so much to me. And I'm sure to his patients, to many, many, many of his patients. And I do believe that his mentorship has given me the basis, basically, of how I interact with many of my patients. And this was something in those days that one did not actually learn much about at medical school. And so he was in a way a role model for me in terms of practice, how it was done, how we interact with patients. And our parents, in one way or another, are role models, and sometimes we don't recognize these. And they allow us freedom. They allow us freedom to grow. They allow us freedom to develop into the person that we feel we would like to be, and they encourage us. And at times, when necessary, they direct us along the right path, despite the many detours that we actually take on the way. And so, given that, might I ask and inquire of you, how do you feel it has influenced your life? Parents always do, and we've got to sit and reflect on that at times, and perhaps the lives of others. And you and I and Trevor, we met prior to your marriage, and surely it's also had an impact on Trevor and family as well.
Very, very definitely. Just going back to your visits to patients, the GP in the days when Dad was practicing and when you started, Garth, if you referred somebody to a specialist, the specialist attended to everything, but you as a GP still, and I think you still do it today, go and visit your patient in hospital. And Dad used to do hospital visits to see his patients, and I would go with him over the weekends on a Saturday and Sunday. Many a time I would be sitting outside Parklands or St. Augustine's Hospital while Dad was doing his hospital rounds and visiting his patients. And it had such an impact on me that my holiday job, I used to work in the baby nursery at Parklands, which was a huge honor. And I used to bath the babies, it was just the most wonderful job to have. I was very honored to be able to work there and do those sort of things. And it was through Dad that I did that, and spending time with him. But yes, Trevor, talking about Trevor and the role Dad played in our lives. When I met Trevor, he was a shipping clerk, and somebody suggested to Trevor that he had the personality to go out into insurance, which is a sales promoting personality type thing. And it's a chance you take. You never know whether you're going to succeed. You never know when your next paycheck is going to come. And when he was approached, he discussed it with his parents, who were absolutely horrified that he was going to leave the security of a corporate environment and go into commissioned earnings. And he came and chatted to my dad, and my father said to him, it's the best move you can make because you are your own future. You determine your future. And because of that, we were able to buy a home. The very first, when we got married, we moved into a new home, which we had funded ourselves.
And I remember that.
Yes. In Glenangle, which now look at it today, there were dirt roads that we used to have to navigate to get to our house. But it was lovely. It was challenging times, but it was our home. Had Trevor still been a shipping clerk, we would be living in a rented flat. And that was only through Dad's encouraging, and he, of course, as you've said, his connections. He said, don't worry, I'll refer you to all my friends and all my patients. And it was sound advice. And Dad always gave sound advice. He listened to people. He listened to what the problem was and analyzed it. And, he understood his patients, as you've said. I've got one lovely little story that I'd like to share with you. And because it is family, I can share it with you. As was common in those days, GPs used to do house calls. And Trevor's parents, Dad was their family doctor, and Trevor's mother worked. So when his sister was ill, who was a lot younger than Trevor was at home to wait for the doctor to come and see her. And when Dad arrived, Trevor's sister was nowhere to be found. And eventually they found her hiding under the bed. And Dad's comment was, if she's well enough to play hide and go seek, she's well enough to come and visit me in my surgery. So tell your parents, when they come back, to bring her down to the surgery. And that's how Dad treated people. He understood them. And that was, one of my favorite stories Dad used to tell about his patients. And I think he was like that with, he was fair. He was fair with everybody.
I think that is such an important role that a family practitioner or anybody actually plays with anyone with whom they come into contact. Because I can remember distinctly in terms of our visits to Parklands Hospital in St. Augustine's. And one of the things that Dad took his time for me when I started in practice was to introduce me to everybody that was involved in medical practice in Durban North. And that was something special. And he would introduce me to the consultants, introduce me to the pharmacists that were here, so that one got to know them, one knew them face to face. And it wasn't a matter of saying, well, who do I need to call on when I needed their services? And the other thing, and to an extent, this has changed so much over the passage of time, and one can't always talk about those times thinking that perhaps they were better. They were better in some ways. But we would frequently have patients that we would manage in hospital, and we would meet the consultant at the hospital and discuss the patient together. And also the whole communication that existed between us and the specialists consultants was excellent. And with time, obviously this changes. There are many more people around. It's very much more difficult to meet everybody and to know everybody. But that personal touch and personal contact, personal understanding, as you said, of the patient is so critically important. So it's wonderful for me to be able to, as it were, go down memory lane, because it was only in thinking about it and reflecting as to the great role that he played, and much as he did with Trevor, and set me on the path. Because when I was at Natal Command, I had no indication of what I was going to do once I'd finished my military service. And it was his prompting, his suggestion, and his thoughts which slowly put me in that direction, and again sort of steered me into the way to the home which we have and which we purchased at the time, in which we still are staying. So it certainly had a wonderful impact on my life, and something that I just wanted to record and to pay tribute to him, because I'm sure there are many, many patients of his who value so much the time that he spent with them and his wonderful doctoring. I would like to thank you for sharing your memories with me this afternoon. It's quite an emotional feeling for me to think of sitting in the study again some 50 years later, and it's wonderful to have met up with you. And so thank you very much for discussing this with us, and I hope that his memory still stays alive for a long time yet to come.
Garth, I think it has been an emotional couple of weeks, months, because we started this a little while ago, and then the pandemic played a role in, like it's done in everybody's lives, and we couldn't get together. But I think what is important to share as well is, you mentioned Dad's name in Durban North or anywhere. There was never a bad comment. Nobody has a single bad thing to say about him. And I think that is a credit to him and who he was. Yeah. And I'm pleased he played a meaningful role in your life. I think he did in a couple of other people. And, he was, and his brother was also a GP. And I think there were a couple of others that they bounced ideas off and shared problem solving, that you needed to have somebody to share it with. I'm pleased he had you in the background as well to share things with.
It was certainly a wonderful time. And I think one remembers this as well because one also has, shall we say, it's not necessarily a duty, but a role that we play even with our own children in terms of mentorship and guidance. And although they might have specific ideas, that one wants to enable them to choose for themselves, but to make that choice in a wise way, because as parents, sometimes we can see, well, that's perhaps not the right road to take. As I said, we often take detours, and that would have put us back on ship because my mother was intent that I would follow a career in music. And although I enjoy music and it's a great pleasure to me, I'm not gifted enough to do that. So fortunately, they allowed me to do that. So I think it's wonderful. And so thank you again for sharing, because it's always difficult, I think, to have memories of one's parents and then to share them, because it evokes a lot of other things in one's mind and experiences as to what happened. So I value your time, and it's been wonderful to meet up with you again and to at least celebrate Dad's life.
Yes, it is a celebration, yeah. And I'm fortunate in living back in my childhood home. His memories are here all the time with me. I'm passionate about my garden, and it was something that Dad loved. So, and often we out doing something together, Trevor and I, and Trevor would say, your dad would be proud of you if he could see you now.
Sure. So I remember you talk about the garden. Many of our plants that we still have in our garden have come from this home, so from this garden. So thank you again, and again, a tribute to your farm.
Thank you, Garth.
Thank you.